Welcome to Jack Theology. I'm Dr. Matt Murphy with Dr. Kevin Young. We have a special guest on today, Dr. Lucas Wilson. Welcome. I'm here to talk about his book, Shame, Sex, Attraction. And it's multiple authors, and we'll get into that, Lucas, about what that's about. Excited to hear more about that.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. I was trying to figure out, I don't know how long I've known you, Lucas. Somehow or other we get connected online, probably through one of your past projects. And I think it was obviously the topic matter, LGBTQ conversations are near and dear to my heart. Matt and I have really gone through a process of transformation on that topic, but also I think just the connection with Liberty University. I think, as I recall, you're a graduate of Liberty University, and Matt and I are graduates of Cedarville College. Liberty University was on the short list. It was down to Cedarville and Liberty for me. I visited Liberty twice. Accidentally bumped into Jerry Falwell while I was there on campus trying to decide whether or not to go there. Ended up not choosing Liberty University, but meeting people from Liberty is always just kind of fun to go back and relive that part of my life and those days as well. And the similarities, I'm sure, that were there between all of our experiences. And so, since then, I've just kind of followed you for the last year, and you have this new book that's out, which is really kind of fascinating. A different perspective, I think, for a lot of folks on what people, obviously, who are LGBTQ, what they go through and what they walk through. And so I think, sadly, even for evangelicals, even though that there has been a lot of transparency, I think, over the last few years into this, topic and this theme that's going on, I still think that there is a lot that's unknown and hidden, and that people just don't understand until they start reading the stories of folks who've gone through it. And so maybe tell us a little bit about I don't know, where do you want to start? You want to start with the book, or you want to start with you?
Well, you know what? I just hearing you talk about your experience coming to Liberty or going to Liberty, bumping into Jerry Falwell. Maybe that was the reason why you didn't want to go to Liberty after that brief encounter. I don't know.
At that point in my life, Jerry Falwell was still a hero.
Fair
Sad
enough.
to say, I grew up independent fundamental Baptist, and Jerry Falwell was kind of a revolutionary among independent Baptists, so he was kind of a maverick. And outside, they kicked him out. So Jerry Falwell was kind of in my lane at that point. He was a fundamentalist, but he was also like a cage rattler.
Yeah, he was. And you know what? It's funny. I actually have a similar experience too. I went down and visited Liberty not twice, but 6 times. And I bumped into Jerry just before he died, because I was there, oh gosh, I think in April, and he died in May. And I remember we bumped into him, and then he kind of grabbed us, and he smacked a few of us, and he called us hoods. I think he meant hoodlums. Anyway, that was my encounter with Jerry Falwell. And I thought at the same time, I thought he was quite cool as well. And looking back, I think I've changed my mind a little bit, but yeah. No, yeah. So I'm Lucas Wilson, and I did not grow up in the church. I actually grew up in somewhat of I guess just like a regular Canadian home, which is not a churched home or not a Christian home. My mom was haunted by her Baptist demons, I suppose, and so there was a little bit of teaching us how to say grace, how to pray before or say our prayers before bed. And when I was little, a little bit of church, but by and large, not really in the church. It was actually in high school that I became involved in the church by way of the creation versus evolution debate. I got hooked on that and decided that if I were to believe in a creator, that I should then believe in, or I should figure out who this creator is. And so that's when I went back to the church that we had, dabbled in when I was little. And that's how I got plugged in. And then, somewhere along the lines, I think it was grade 10 or 11, I went down and visited Liberty. And, for a Canadian kid, everything's bigger in the States, right? Everything's sort of, especially the college experience. And so seeing Liberty was like, oh gosh, look at this. This is crazy. This is cool. This is, fun. And it was sold to us as if it's Christian, it ought to be better. And so I was under the impression that it was better because it was Christian, and then I was going to go get my Christian foundation and then go on, and change the world for Jesus. And things changed, certainly, both once I got to Liberty and then also when I left Liberty, and then the slow deconstruction process that I've been on for the past, I don't know, 10-ish, 12-ish years. And but yeah, I went to Liberty, and then I did some schooling after that. And now I do research on conversion practices and intergenerational trauma, literature, history, religious studies, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, because I'm an interdisciplinary researcher at this point. But yeah, that's a little bit of who I am.
How'd you get into that topic?
The conversion practices.
Well, yeah, conversion practices, LGBTQ. Like, what was the draw there?
Well, first of all, Kevin, I'm a big old queer, so that certainly was, my entree in some senses. But then on top of that, for me, you're right. I kind of glossed over, or didn't even talk about what actually connects me to the topic. So when I was at Liberty, I underwent 4 years of conversion therapy, and so in the book
Wow.
we're going to talk about today, I talk about my one experience in the group, conversion therapy program at Liberty, but for the rest of the time I was there, I was in the one-on-one program. I only went to the group once, and the rest again was sort of reserved for the one-on-one talk therapy or counseling therapy that I had with Dane Emmerich, the in-house conversion therapist. And so um, that happened starting in my freshman year, and then yeah, up until my senior year, I was in their one-on-one program.
4 years, which we're going to plug the book multiple times, but since you mentioned it, same sex attraction, which it's right. Here, let me move it so it's not right over your face. Sorry, Lucas. Incredible book. Have read almost all of it. Your story that closes it, which you just mentioned, is like extremely compelling. The way you closed that, like that last paragraph, just it wrecked me. Just damn. It just wrecked me. But 4 years in conversion therapy is difficult to understand for somebody like me who grew up fundamentalist. It's easy to understand why somebody would get into conversion therapy, but for someone who did not grow up inside of the church, did not grow up fundamentalist, to willingly, I think, choose as a queer individual conversion therapy. Can you make sense of that? Does it make sense? Like help somebody like me who understand, who, the journey kind of feels like it would be opposite from that, but you went in a different direction than a lot of people.
Yeah,
Into
so
fundamentalism rather than out of it.
that's it. And so I think in a lot of ways for me, it was a function. First of all, just going into the church was a function of trying to cover up my sexuality, I think, in part. I mean, there was also the part that I knew that it was going to make my mom happy. My dad thought it was weird as hell. Like, my dad was like, what the fuck is this? But my mom, she was, super supportive of it, just again, because of her religious upbringing, and I would maybe more accurately say haunting. But I think that was certainly part of it. I mean, I was also interested in God and questions of justice, ethics, morality, blah blah blah. And that has always been, or that certainly was, a point of interest at the time. But I think really, in large part, looking back, like what drew me into the church in the first place, I think it was a cover for my sexuality, because according to the fundamentalist or evangelical, mindset, one cannot be gay and be a Christian. It's this world of binaries. It's this world of either or. And, I thought this was going to be a cover or covering over of my sexuality. And so that was certainly a big part of it. I mean, there was also like the fact that, it was like a built-in community, and, I was excited to make new friends and all this kind of stuff, because, I just started high school, and high school was great. I actually had a great high school experience, but it was also like this extra group of friends on top of my high school friends. So I'm a very, very social person, and I've always have been. And so it was, alluring, or sort of, that drew me in. And then on top of that, the youth pastor at the time was like very much like involved, and came to my high school and like brought pizza and that kind of stuff. Looking back, very weird, but at the time I thought it was cool, because there was some sort of, adult, showing interest. So that was part of it. But I think, to talk about the actual conversion therapy program part, I mean, again, like within this cosmology, you can only be, you cannot follow God and be queer. And so, again, I think that for a lot of people out there, this is obviously like a false dichotomy. You can be queer and you can be a Christian. You can be a person of faith, in other faith traditions, and be, trans, whatever. But within the world that I was living in, you couldn't. And so I was made to believe that I had to do something about it if I were to stay in relationship, in right relationship with Jesus. And so for me, the conversion therapy program was, an obvious choice. And in fact, it was a large reason why I even went to Liberty, because I knew ahead of time on one of those 6 trips that I went down and visited that they had made it clear, because they had these announcements where they projected the worship lyrics. There was also these like rotating announcements that they had. And one of them was about their conversion therapy program. They obviously didn't call it conversion therapy. They said something along the lines of, like, are you struggling with same-sex attraction or some, tomfoolery like that? And I was like, yes, I am. That's me. And so I knew that they had this program, and I was very much invested in going to Liberty because I knew that I could do this program. And at the time I thought, I could become straight, find a woman to marry, and off I'd go and then live a life of godly normalcy back in Canada. My plan was always to go back to Canada. And so that's really, I think when we think about, the question about, was it like my choice? And it was my choice. And I take full responsibility. I'm not in any way sort of like trying to, abdicate responsibility and say, that I didn't do it. Like, obviously I did. But at the same time, when I think about these systems, for a lot of folks, we do things, particularly queers, but, it's not just, queer folks, but queers do things in these systems because they're told they have to. They're told that if they want to stay within, they got to follow the rules. And so, yes, I quote unquote wanted to go to conversion therapy, but I was pushed to want to go to conversion therapy. I was told I wanted to go to conversion therapy because, of course, looking back now, why in the world would I do something that's against who I am? Right. But for those of us who are queer, and for those, again, who have any sort of point of difference, like women, why do they willfully submit to the system? Well, they're made to submit to the system. Same with queers. We're made to submit to the system. And so, yes, again, I take full responsibility for what I did. But at the same time, I know that, the question of agency is more complicated for those of us, especially when you're, both, for me, it was when I was underage, and then when I was over the age of 18, but not long after that. So, yeah, it's looking back, of course, like you feel like a goof for doing it, but I also now understand and have that critical distance to allow myself to understand, why I did it in the first place.
Kevin, you're muted.
Sorry. I guess I absolutely I absolutely understand the idea of personal responsibility. But also just, reading some of the stories in your book, like, it sounds like you were a victim, like abuse, trauma, like, it's hard for me to hear those words, of you taking responsibility for abuse. Like, it almost sounds like you're identifying with the abuser. So how do you reconcile like that tension between what was done to you and what you allowed to be done to you?
Yeah, I've never actually thought about it that way, and that's a good point. This idea of like, because I identify it as abuse. I even identify it as abuse in the introduction of the story. Sorry, of the collection in the intro. Yeah, even yesterday I was talking with some folks, and I identified it as abuse, but I've never really thought about making the connection between saying I chose to do this, or again I was made to choose to do this, and also abuse. So, point taken, actually.
Well, what made me think about that, honestly, Lucas, was one of the parts of your book that just like 2 parts wrecked me. The one I told you is the very end of the book, your story, the very last paragraph in your story. And when you pointed out the difference between, and I pull it up here to make sure I get it right, religious trauma and moral injury. And I felt like, as you were just talking, and as I was thinking about that question, the tension between victimization and abuse, the religious trauma part makes a lot of sense to me, and I think about a lot. But the moral injury part was a complete surprise to me. For those of us who don't have the book in front of us, I mean, I can read it here if you need me to, but talk a little bit about that moral injury part of it, because that just kind of blindsided me whenever you pulled that out.
Yeah, when I think of moral injury, I think about having done something where you either stood by, watched from the sidelines what was happening, and you knew it was wrong, or you were a part of it, in some way implicated in the victimization either of yourself or of others. And I think about this in a broader sense, just beyond conversion therapy. For me, I think about like the people that I brought into the system, like, when I was trying to like convert people, and looking back thinking, what the hell was I doing there? But again, in the context of conversion therapy, or in the context more broadly of conversion practices, right? So if we're thinking of conversion therapy as, what oftentimes people think of when they think of conversion therapy, but conversion practices are really any effort to change an individual's sexual orientation, gender identity or gender expression. And so if, that can be as something as big as electroshock therapy, which obviously a number of folks have undergone, but as something as small as saying to a little boy who's sitting with his legs crossed saying, hey, don't sit like that, you look like a faggot, right? Like that's, or you look like a girl, you look like a pansy, whatever insert your negative word there. So with that, this is what we would consider a conversion practice. And so for me, I think to myself, like the things that I did to other people, and again, also, I was also in many ways, and every sort of person who's undergone conversion therapy becomes in some way, shape, or form their own conversion therapist at a certain point, because you internalize the messages that have been given to you, and then you start practicing these, again, practices on yourself. But again, for me, like when I was at camp and there was, a young gay guy who knew he was gay, I mean, I'm assuming he knew I was gay, and then like pushing him, toward not necessarily saying, hey, you have to be straight, but also like not saying, hey, it's okay to be queer. And like the moral injury of not supporting a young queer at the time, I just feel, again, to this day, I feel like a terrible person for not doing that. For other people, pushing them towards saying, hey, like, for me, I was in the one-on-one group and telling people in my, I was a prayer leader at Liberty, and saying, hey, you should probably go meet with Pastor Dane as well, the conversion therapist on campus, or saying things like that. And so I was a part of the system. I was experiencing moral injury, and I feel today like terrible about it. Right? I feel guilty for the things that I did, and in some ways I feel ashamed of the things that I did, right? Like that I pushed people in this direction and I implicated others in these practices. And so it wasn't just me that was affected, it was others, and I sort of perpetuated the system beyond myself. And so that's when I think of moral injury, at least in my experience.
So I have a question. What do you do with like the Pastor Dane? Because I've been the Pastor Dane. I've, I guess committed moral injury is your term you use in the book towards others. And I've since my whole process, my growth in Christ, owned that, repented, went to those folks, and sought restitution as best as I could and knew how at the time. And so what do you do with a Pastor Dane, or someone like myself who thought they were doing the right thing? I mean, I feel like as I look back, part of it was just the evangelical system that you're brought up in, and this is what you do, right? When this comes up, and there's a lot of those things too, and I think in our church systems, not just on this issue, but many others. As you were sharing your story, I was thinking about stuff I even got caught up in at Cedarville that I look back on now, and it's like, well, that was spiritual abuse. I didn't know it at the time, but that's what that was. So what do you do? I don't know. Have you processed through that? Like, how's your relationship with that path?
Like, I think like for you, for me, for anyone who's really been a part of the evangelical system, I think there's some sense of moral injury, right? We've all done something and said something and thought something that now conflicts with our deeply held, moral convictions. And I think the problem with the evangelical world is that so much of what is considered moral is what is considered immoral outside of that system, and vice versa, right? That, things that we celebrate outside of the church, the evangelical church specifically, are things that are shunned and that are, sort of scoffed at or made fun of or, belittled. Whereas within the church, again, vice versa. And so I think that for anyone who was, and I first should say, Matt, that you are very different from Dane, right? Like, Dane still believes that this is something that should be done. He's retired, thank God, but he's not in any way, quote unquote, repented or sort of felt guilty about what he's done. In fact, when he retired, there was an article written by the university, someone at the university, celebrating what he had done. And they, of course, used a lot of really like obfuscated terms and sort of, what's the word, like coded or euphemistic language to describe what he did. They never once said what he did, which obviously in large part was conversion therapy. And so when they had this celebratory or sort of like laudatory article saying like this man has so many crowns on his or what's the word, so many jewels on his crown that he's going to lay before Jesus one day, I responded by writing my own article and publishing that about what he had done and sort of clarifying, what exactly are we celebrating? And it turns out that he was really pissed off because his granddaughter emailed or messaged me on Facebook saying, "Leave my grandpa alone." And so I know that he read it. I know that he heard about it.
Good.
And I know again that, yeah,
sorry, but good.
Yeah, I was just calling a spade a spade. You know what I mean? I'm just
sure
like,
your sim
this
will
is
find
what
you
he
out.
did.
I think there's a verse in there somewhere that says that.
That's it. That's it. So I know that he like stands by what he did, right? Like I know that he's not changed his views. So I think first and foremost, like you guys are quite different in that sense, at least, at least. And I'm assuming there are many other differences between you and Dane. So the thing with Dane though, and then with you, you think about like for anyone who has harmed queer folks, or for anyone who's harmed people of color, anyone who has harmed women, like there are so many different groups within the this world that evangelicals who are normally straight white men have harmed. And so I think again, there's the first part. I think that's important is like the apology, right? And actually saying, "Hey, I'm sorry," and not in the sort of like a grand or general sense, but I think like to specific individuals, like for anyone who it was like we had done something to, for us to go and say, "Hey, like I'm sorry." I think the other part is listening, and I think it's a really important part because so often when people apologize, they want to just get the apology said and then be like, "Do you forgive me?" and then sort of move on. It's like, first of all, not your question to ask, "Do you forgive me?" Right? It's up to the person to forgive, and not sort of you pushing in that direction. And I use you in the general sense. I don't mean like you specifically, Dr. Matt Murphy, but like right? I think that that's an important thing, and I think reading in this case, if we're talking about specifically conversion therapy or pushing, you're saying before in the past that there were some folks that were pushed to conversion therapy. If that's the case, then like reading the stories or listening to the people who have stories to tell, right? And whether it be the specific people that you encountered in the past, or now maybe you're not in contact with those people, but now doing your best to listen and be attentive to what exactly is being said and their experiences. I think that's huge. And then on top of that, not just again the apology, not just listening, but then actually doing something about the past sort of injustices, the past sort of things that we've done. I think that's important as well, right? So instead of like if we have a platform to speak, that we're speaking out against homophobia, we're speaking out against transphobia, and if we have actionable things we can do, then let's do those as well. I don't know what that means, if that means donating to a queer homeless shelter, or if that means helping out in this particular ministry, whatever it is, right? I think that not only listening and making an apology and like a sincere apology, but also doing, I think these are all things that are important. But again, I think that even just you asking the question sets you apart from so many, because so many people either want to brush it under the rug or forget about what they've done. And so I think that these are things that I think are avenues to pursue if in fact something in the past has been done. Then I think this is a way to address it in some way, shape, or form.
So, Lucas, not everybody who probably hears this, certainly a large swath of evangelicals, would say that conversion therapy is a bad thing. Even though it may have a bad image, a lot of folks would still say that converting somebody from homosexuality into heterosexuality is a good thing, especially if the person themselves wants that. So, you obviously have a very unique perspective in that you are an academic as well as a member of the community. How do you answer that? What is the problem with conversion therapy and all of the variations of it?
Yeah, so I think plain and simple, conversion therapy doesn't work, right? Like there's never been a documented case of conversion therapy working, and those who have claimed to have had, a conversion experience, the vast majority of these people have soon been found out to be liars, right? That they have been found out to like be on Grindr or having, meth-fueled orgies in hotel rooms or, whatever.
I don't see the
And
problem.
so I find yeah, it goes from grinder to meth real quick sometimes. No, I'm just thinking of a number of like instances, right? Like former leaders in the ex-gay movement from like Exodus International. A number of them were, found out to be doing things that they quote unquote shouldn't have been doing. A number of folks outside of those ministries in other Christian ministries who have been found out to be doing precisely what they've not been supposed to be, what they weren't supposed to be doing. I think that it's just hilarious when you have these people who are up there giving testimonies and saying like God has has changed me, and it's just like so clear that like Jonathan, like this, you're not changed. Like I can, it's very clear that nothing's changed. Like you and I both know, right? Like come on. And so I think that first of all, again, not only does conversion therapy not work, like no scientific research has ever supported that. The only scientific paper that has claimed that are either studies from like before 1982, and a number of those studies, in fact, pardon me, all of those studies, there was a meta review of all of them, and I don't mean meta like the media, social media, whatever thing, like just a sort of overview of these studies, and all of them have been found to have methodological issues with how they conducted the studies. And so if then you fast forward from the 80s up until, I think it was 2008 or 2013, I don't remember the exact date. There were no studies backing anything, along these lines up. There was no study saying conversion therapy is working until this one study by this Columbia University professor, and he claimed that, it worked. And then again, that study was retracted, not just by the journal, but by the scientist himself when he said, no, you're absolutely right. Like, this is bogus, right? So there's no academic research to back this up, the Spitzer study. And so on top of that, not only is there no academic research to back this up, there's only anecdotal evidence with like those queers who are saying like God saved me and God changed me, or like sister, like enough out of you, like we know it's not true. Putting that aside, not only are there no studies to back up its efficacy, but there's also no studies there are numerous studies, I should say, that establish the harms, right? And so the harms are many. It's everything from, again, guilt, shame, anxiety, different emotional consequences. Again, we've talked about moral injury, we've talked about religious trauma, we've talked about the psychological issues that are at play, an increased chance of suicidal ideation, an increased chance of experiencing homelessness. Right, there are numerous consequences. So it's not only this thing that just doesn't work. It's this thing that actually hurts. It's this thing that injures. It's this thing that damages people, and in some cases to the point of taking their own lives. And so again, if we're thinking about conversion therapy in terms of abuse, which is exactly what it has been identified as, or according to the UN Rapporteur on Torture, as torture in certain instances or certain examples, this is something that I think that if in fact you do believe that conversion therapy works, first of all, ask the vast majority of people who have undergone it, and they'll tell you that it doesn't work. And then the ones who say it does work, of course, what is it? Like 99% of people say it doesn't work, and the 1% who do say it work are lying, right? It's kind of like that. And these again are the people who are quickly found out to be liars. And so I would say, again, look at the research, look at the studies on this topic. Of course, the problem is that a lot of the people who would be claiming that conversion therapy works or are advocating for it are not people who are invested in academic conversations or really do trust research, or the medical community, the psychiatric community, or like take your pick on any sort of professional community. So that's of course the issue, and the evidence that you would use to say, hey, what you're saying is a bunch of bogus bullshit. They wouldn't necessarily listen to you. Why? Because they don't trust the sources that you trust.
Yeah, a friend of mine went to a conversion therapy camp, and he said it's around 15 to 20 he was in his cohort that he went through with, and at least 3 had taken their life as a result of that. And so they actually shut the camp down because of so many suicides coming out of that place. I think you're right. Like it doesn't work. Your sexuality is your sexuality. People say, "Oh, you're not born with it. You're mentally ill." Today I made a couple posts about Trump's very binary statement that there's only 2 genders and that sort of thing. That brought up a whole other thing. And
can't even get the difference between gender and sexuality, right? I mean, come on.
And it's so, people, that always is the argument. And I think as I've thought about this, and as you were talking, I was thinking too, is we've established, we meaning the evangelical church has established our social norms, that this is what you got to fit into. And so conversion therapy, if we're really honest, is really about, even reading your story, Dane, his whole goal was just to get you to fit in the social norms. It didn't seem like his goal was to actually convert you to heterosexuality. It was just figure out a way would you say, to put where to put your dick, that it like fits in the social norm, right? I
Yeah.
laughed at that. I thought that was good, but I think it's true. I think, and it's certainly like somebody like your friend Mac uh, could figure out a way to fit in that social norm, but it doesn't change who he is, right? It doesn't change their sexuality, and that's sad. Like as
Yeah.
Kevin pointed out, that is really sad that our system has created something in which people can't truly be themselves. And as a pastor, I try to teach people to be themselves, because who God created you to be is who God wants in the world. That's how we can best bless the world
Yeah.
as the body of Christ.
The crazy
And
thing
we
is, though,
can't do
Matt, you
that.
referenced this, and so did you, Lucas. It does change you, though. I mean, it does convert people, but it doesn't convert what the therapy wants to be converted. I mean, the amount of trauma, longstanding trauma that these people still, you know, carry around. The differences in their view of their self-worth, you know, decades later, the way they interact relationally with other people, their spiritual journey. I mean, just reading those stories and the people that I know, it does change people. It destroys. Is just insane. The long-standing, long-term, and it feels like for a lot of folks, permanent trauma that comes out of it is just unimaginable.
Yeah, and you know the number of people who have reached out already, because I mean the book is not, it's you know whatever the release date, people are getting it before the release date, and then blah blah blah, whatever. So some people have gotten their copies, and hearing, you know, people already responding to it, and hearing people say, you know, I didn't go to Liberty, but I went to this school, or I went to this church, and it's similar, and you know, here's my experience, and hearing all of this, and hearing people just like talk about how it's like, you know, some people have said like I've argued that it like ruined their lives, like what their experience was. And you know, even you're thinking about in my story, I talk about Mac. There's I reference really quickly, and it's just like a passing reference to another friend who also went to Liberty with us, also gay, the first person I ever came out to ever at Liberty, at least. And he and I, you know, we went along Liberty together. So did Mac. I mean, we kind of lost contact closer to the end. Not lost contact, but I think we weren't like hanging out on the regular or anything like that. And they graduated, I graduated, I left, I went, you know, to Toronto, and then these two guys, you know, my friend, I can use his name because he's fine with it. My friend Michael, he got married to our friend Courtney, and Michael and I, we had talked really early on at Liberty, and I said, like, have you ever, you know, been attracted to a woman? And he said, never. Well, then he marries Courtney, and then I remember like seeing him on social media and just being like, dear God, like, what is his life like? And I see like, you know, it's very like Lynchburg, very like Liberty, very like Southern, you know, they're doing like fall photos in plaid next to a pumpkin, that kind of bullshit. And
Out in the
so I'm
fields
just
with
like,
the wheat. Yeah, I know.
oh my God. I'm like, could you imagine like that was your life? And so I'm just like seeing this. And again, like I'm becoming more and more comfortable within my own skin as time is going on. And I started seeing him, he was like running a lot. And I saw like, he was doing a lot of like physical activity. He wasn't like a bigger guy, but he was, you know, he had some meat on his bones, and he got really, really skinny. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, this seems like so metaphorical, right? Like that he's running, like what's he running from? You know, obviously from himself, obviously from like the situation that he's in. And then I see this like birth announcement, or like, you know, they're about to have a child, and I'm like, there's the nail in the coffin. He's going to be in this relationship. And then I see, you know, a few years later, another birth announcement, like they're having another kid. And I'm just like, this poor guy. And he had unfollowed me at this point. He and I had like we were pretty close for a while, but he had unfollowed me, I think, in large part because he didn't really want to see my life in contrast to his. Well, I wrote this article about it eventually, about him eventually. I didn't use his name, and I don't even use like the people's names other than Dane Emmerich. I use his name. Everyone else in the story, I changed their name, just for like, I'm not trying to out anyone. But I was right. I had written this article that the story that you guys read, it's based on. It's in RVA magazine, and so I had written this article. And I remember I always wondered, like, did he read this story? Like, did he ever, you know, come in contact with this article? Because I posted it, and other people had reposted it. Well, one day, it was earlier. Well, it was February of 2024. I get this message on Facebook, and he hadn't unfriended me on Facebook, but also on Facebook, I didn't really post too much. And so he hadn't unfriended me. So I get this message, and it's a link, and I see it, the RVA magazine link, and I'm like, oh shit. He sends it to me. And then I'm like, uh-oh. And I'm just sitting there looking at my phone, like, what the hell? And then all of a sudden, the next message is, because I called him Gabriel in the story, because at the time, again, he wasn't out, so I just used Gabriel as a name. It's another angel's name, so I thought it was kind of funny, but whatever. So Gabriel, so it's Michael. He sends me, he goes, Gabriel, in quotes. He says, postscript, Gabriel just left his wife, and I was like, oh my god, oh my god. So I pick up the phone, and that's when I start, actually open the message and I start talking to him. Anywho, long story short, this guy, because of conversion practices, actually happened to him in high school. He didn't go through anything at Liberty, but he went through some other stuff at Liberty that wasn't with Dane Emmerich, but it was with other people, and people on campus who were like praying over him and like asking the demon of Moloch to come out of him, all that cute stuff. But he met with these pastors, whatever, and then he eventually gets married and he has children. And now it's this life of unlearning, right? To borrow from another memoir's title, that Anthony Van Brown's title of like he has to unlearn all of what he's done for so long and like learn what does it mean to be a queer person at the age of 35, and so yes, it does cause a lot of damage. And the other person in the story that I write about is still married, still in it to win it, I believe with a child, and so it's crazy just because, first of all, yes, it does ruin lives. And second of all, the good news is that there's hope to get out of it and it's never too late. And so Michael being a really great example of that.
So I don't know if you're an expert on conversion therapy. We'll consider you an expert on conversion therapy. But as you were, writing this book, reading people's stories, as you run across people's stories, anything surprise you?
I think, yes. First of all, yes. For me, I never really thought about conversion therapy being anything other than really what we think of when we think of conversion therapy as being in like, a pastor's, office, or, a crackpot sort of, therapist that's unlicensed or whatever. But, and I knew that there were, conversion experiences beyond that, and that conversion experiences actually didn't come from religious context. They actually came from the medical and psychiatric context. So I knew that it wasn't just reserved for like evangelical and white Christian fundamentalist pastors and, conversion therapists. But I never really thought about, the fact that parents can be conversion practitioners, right? They can be the ones to be doing this to their children. And then beyond that, again, I don't want to collapse definitions and say, oh, all of us have undergone conversion therapy, because not all of us have. But what I will say is that every single queer, and not just queers, but a number of straight folks have undergone conversion practices as well. Right? If any young boy who, again, maybe he's straight, but he also likes to play with dolls, or he likes to cross his legs, or I don't know, likes to play, do ballet, whatever, and his parents or someone, his friends or his teacher or whatever makes fun of him, or his youth pastor says, what the hell are you doing? Like, why? Or I guess he wouldn't say what the hell, he said, what the heck are you doing? Right? What are you doing? Like, you shouldn't be doing this, or that's wrong, or that's weird, or that's gay, or that's, feminine. Therefore, these are conversion practices that anyone can experience, right? Like, it's a way of trying to straighten us out into a heteronormative model. Obviously, conversion practices aren't as sort of like, what's the word, destructive for a lot of straight folks. But for queers, I would say that every single queer person out there has undergone conversion practices, even if they haven't undergone conversion therapy. And that for me was a mind-blowing moment, because it just brought, again, not to broaden definitions to the point where there's no real sort of like distinction between my experience and someone else's, but I think that is something to note, and it was for me quite surprising. But on top of that, the research that I had done, and I've been doing research on conversion practices for a decent amount of time, but one specific author, actually two specific authors, it's a co-authored article by Christine M. Robinson and Sue Spivey. They have an article called Genocidal Intentions, and genocidal intentions, or genocidal intents. It's all about looking at how conversion practices are definitionally in line with the definition of genocide, right? If these folks could have their way, I would not exist. And some might say, well, they don't not want you to exist. They just don't want you to be queer. It's like, okay, so you don't want me to exist. I'm queer. It's like saying to a woman, I like you. I just don't like that you're a woman, and I wish that could change. It's like, and in fact, I think that because you're a woman, like you don't have the right to live as a woman. You should have to change. And like a woman to say, well, obviously, like I'm a woman. You can't divorce me from my womanhood. Same with me. Like I'm a big old homo. Like it's not, you can't change me. And I couldn't imagine myself as a straight person. I don't know what the hell that would look like. And it'd be very weird. I wouldn't be me anymore. And so, obviously, when we think about conversion therapists, those who are trying to erase queerness from their midst, they're trying to do their best to legislate queerness out of, the country, so that it's not a reality. These people don't want us to live. These people want us, in other words, gone, which is definitionally a desire for genocide.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just let that sink in
I
for just a minute.
yeah. I mean, I see it like we see it. Kevin and I talk all the time that we see that, especially white straight Christian nationalism wants to wipe out, you know, anything different, which includes queer and gay and lesbian, and it's frightening. I think you hit the nail on the head, and I think you're right too. I have three boys. I have four kids, three boys and a girl, and my boys growing up. All love to do girly things, that would be considered girly, right? All of them at some point. But then at some point, maybe they got made fun of at school or teased, or even me, maybe I, contributed to that as well. They stopped. So it is interesting and fascinating that you highlight that, because it's normal whether they're gay or straight. I don't know what my kids are going to be. They're not old enough yet, really, all of them. So you don't know. And yeah, I think you as a parent, I've grown and learned, as every parent does. You grow and learn with each kid. So hopefully the fourth one, they're the most well adjusted. But yeah, I think you hit on a lot there. Yeah, I was just thinking too, like advice for parents, like in this, because I think, as I talk to a lot of my parental friends, I don't know about you, Kevin, but it's like there's fears there, like even those that are like, they're allies and supportive and affirming of gay and lesbian queer lifestyles. There's a fear that they don't want their kid to be that because of what society will do to them. There's that, and then there's fears of those that just are anti all of that. Um, and so, what advice would you give to parents on this issue?
Honestly, and it sounds as simple as it is, and it sounds as maybe like raw as it is, don't be a fucking asshole. I mean that in the most honest and like sort of like blunt way I possibly can say that. Like when parents say like I still love you, it's like, excuse me, like you still love me? What does that mean? You still love me? Like I, what in the world could I possibly do like that could change my, that would change my, your love for me? And that's what I would assume. Like, and no parent would ever change their, love for their kid. Like for me, like when I came out, I was 25 when I came out, and my mom went batshit. Like my mom went absolutely crazy, and for like 3 months, she was going on and on and on, like being really, really disgusting, saying a lot of really gross things, like describing what she imagined to be my sex life, which I'm like, you don't even know if I have sex. Like obviously I was, but like wasn't telling her that. And like, she was like saying like really just bizarre things. And finally, I was like, I will never ever try to convince anyone to love me. Like that's not my job to convince someone to love me. Either they love me or they don't. And if they don't, then they can get the fuck out of my life. And I mean that with like as much like anger and disgust as it probably sounds. And I said to my mom, I literally was like, fuck you, you're out. And we didn't talk for 2 years. And then when we did talk, she brought it back up again. And I said, no, you're out again. We didn't talk for 4 years. I was like, no, we're good. Like, this is not how this works. This is not how this will ever work. No one, let alone my mom, will talk to me like that. And I think to myself, like, no, like I couldn't imagine a parent saying, I still love you. No, you love your child. You don't still love them despite something. There's nothing to love them despite, like X, whatever it is. There should just be love, right? Like, and this idea that parents are struggling with something. It's like, no, this is not something that your kid needs to like give you time to deal with. No, you should just like, first of all, anticipate that your kid could be anything, even including queer. And if they are, the answer is I love you. I love you. That's it. Period. Like full stop. There's nothing more that needs to be said. And again, like for those who are anti-queer, again, like I just love when all of a sudden parents become biblical scholars, or like anyone becomes a biblical scholar. I'm like, oh, It's like, you want to chat about the Bible? Let's fucking tango, right? Like, here we go. I love this when Christians have this idea that not only that they understand the Bible better than you, but that you, having a conversation with them in some way, like they're going to be the one to change your mind, even though you've had like multiple, like dozens and dozens of these conversations, if not like hundreds of these conversations over your lifespan, but all of a sudden they're going to be the one to change you. I love that, right? Like the hubris and like the ability or the sort of like self-estimation.
It's
But no,
typically
I
the
think,
first time they've read the verse too, right? They've never
right?
read the verse
Have you heard?
before. They're the
Yeah,
expert.
have you heard of the book of
have you ever heard of
Leviticus?
Leviticus?
Yeah, Romans 1, anyone? Yeah, it's just hilarious, right? Because like, and so I find I used to think like, oh, we need to have patience, we need to have grace for these people, but these are some of the most ungraceful, impatient, truly base people I can think of, right? Like that simply because of like who their child's attracted to or how that your child identifies gender wise, that all of a sudden they're not worthy of their love or that they still love them. There's no still, my friends. There's I love you, period. You can ask questions. You can be shocked, even. That's fine, right? Like you maybe had one idea of who this person was throughout his or her their life, and now that idea is different. Yeah, that might take some time to get used to in a certain sense, but not where your love isn't ever sort of in question or in flux. No, if that is the case, shame on you, right? I find it so wild that for so many of us queers, we've been made to feel ashamed. The shame is inappropriately placed, right? The proper place for the shame is on those folks. It's on homophobes. It's on transphobes. It's not on us. And I think that that's where it should be. And I think that people need to sit in that shame for a second and know what it feels like for, to walk in our shoes for a hot minute. Because if they do, I think they realize really quickly that it's not a good place to be.
So, Lucas, you haven't just experienced that shame and guilt from family, friends, other people, the community. You've experienced that directly from religious people and religious people who, as you said, many times see themselves as being the mouthpiece of God. You obviously, at one point, very much hoped or wanted there, to be a strong, spiritual component in your life. I hope this question isn't too far, but how do you now feel about religion, faith, spirituality, after the journey that you've taken, which has been so negatively impacted by faith? Is there any desire or involvement or investment there from your part or not? Or is, you like so many other people who go through conversion therapy, you're like, I just can't, even if I wanted to, I couldn't.
So I'll start the answer with a quick story. There was someone who recently reached out. Well, he reaches out to me every like 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 months kind of thing, and like says, "Hey, I hope you're well," or comments on my status or on Facebook or whatever, and like or Facebook status, whatever it's called, and says like whatever, like sort of engages. And he apparently listened to one of the podcasts I've done recently, and he said, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I just listened to it. I didn't realize you aren't a Christian anymore." And he and I were never friends. Like we never once hung out other than in a group at a jungle gym. I still don't know why we were in a park, but we were at a jungle gym. It was so hot. Anyway, that was the only time we ever hung out not even one-on-one. It was again within a group. But he went to the same campus as me. We ran in the same circles in some senses. Went to Liberty actually, but had a number of Canadian connections, including the fact that he married a woman from Canada. And so all this to say, he said to me, he's like, I just feel awful. It makes me so sad that you're not a Christian, like sort of goes on about whatever and like says that he feels bad and all this. And he says like, and I think he attributed it to the dogma from Liberty. If I remember correctly, the language he used was like the dogma from Liberty. And I said to him, I said, first of all, like, yeah, great to hear from you. Like it wasn't, but sometimes you have to, say those white lies. But I said, first of all, there's nothing to be sad about. Like I said, my life's significantly better now that I'm out of the church. And no, you shouldn't be upset that I don't have a relationship with Jesus, because I don't think I ever did. And I never really, not in the sense that I didn't at the time believe that I was, talking to Jesus. I don't believe that Jesus exists. Like that's not what my belief system is anymore. And so I said, like, there's nothing to be sad about. I said, again, my life's significantly improved. I feel great. Like, don't like, but if we ever are, in the same city, sure, let's grab it. Cause he's like, let's grab a coffee. I was like, let's grab a coffee. We're in the same city. Like, why not? But again, I think this guy, his only reason for ever reaching out to me was that he knew I was gay, because that was very clear from online. but I think he wanted to keep sort of like in context so that when the time comes that we can have a relation or a conversation about my sexuality so as to change me eventually. Which obviously never happened, and here we are today where I'm now again both out and not a Christian, and he's feeling bad about both. So for me, I don't, and again, he attributed my sort of lack of faith at this point to liberty, which I'm like, you think that liberty played that significant, that much of a role in my life, and obviously played a big role in my life, and I don't mean to take away from like the damage that it did, because it did a lot, and it was not good, and the education I received was wildly disappointing, as one might expect. But my faith wasn't impacted by other people's actions, and I actually have no. I can understand and appreciate why people's faith, why they give up their faith in response to other people's actions and other people's sort of words. For me, though, it's kind of like food. It's like I had a bad experience. I don't know with like oranges. Does that mean I'm not going to eat fruits anymore? No, like just because I had a bad experience with one fruit or maybe multiple fruits, maybe the grapes were terrible too, doesn't mean that I'm going to give up on apples, like, or in a greater sense, sort of like food. That doesn't make sense to me. It's just because there were some bad actors, or there were some bad religious traditions like evangelicalism, like white Christian fundamentalism, Pentecostalism, whatever, that I now therefore am not a religious person. My faith really, my faith sort of changed once I accepted my sexuality, because of course you need to change your faith in order to accept your sexuality, because you can't be an evangelical according to their understanding and their definitions if you are to remain faithful to the tradition. But for me, my faith really changed because of my other research area, which is actually on the Holocaust. Most of my past research was not in queer studies. It was mostly in intergenerational trauma, and also the Holocaust, looking at the intergenerational transmission of trauma between survivors and their children and their grandchildren. And of course, I had done work on sort of the antecedents, particularly the Christian influences on the Holocaust and why the Holocaust ever was made possible, Christianity, Christian scriptures, Christian theology, etc. But then also like the after effects of the Holocaust. And so for me, doing this research and really engaging with Jewish authors, I'm thinking specifically of Elie Wiesel, who engages in a very Jewish tradition of protesting God, which is funny that evangelicals are part of the Protestant faith, but don't do a lot of protesting. They might protest, certain people's parades, but not so much God. And so, interacting with, Elie Wiesel and reading his sort of saying like, God, like, what the hell was the Holocaust? What was going on there? Where were you? Where were you? That for me was a model for how I could talk to God. And then on top of that, once I was like, okay, I can actually like protest or sort of like debate with God, then I started thinking beyond that. And I started thinking about how the hell, again, in line with Wiesel, how did the Holocaust ever happen? And for me, it was looking at God's inaction and God's action in other areas and thinking, if God acts here, but God doesn't act here, I therefore can't believe in a good God. If God's doing, something here and apparently God's ways are higher than mine and more mysterious, I don't give a shit, to be honest. What I care about is that things happened and God allowed it. But God didn't allow, X, Y, and Z over here. And God's apparently blessing people over here for no good reason. And that for me, God's on trial, right? Like God's the one who's culpable, not me anymore. And so I don't have the ability and like sort of like a rational ability to reconcile how God has acted or not acted throughout human history, including in my life, but also in the lives of my friends and family and those who I've encountered along the way, and square that away with the good God. For me, that doesn't make sense, and that's where my faith. That's where I gave it up. And to be honest, I've been so happy and so much happier without the system, the religious system that I was a part of. And not to say that you can't be a Christian or love Jesus and be a good person. Obviously, you can. But for me, it just doesn't make sense, that God and that Jesus from the Bible with the rest of human history. I can't square it away.
So I know we gotta wrap up soon. Do you know of anybody in your research who you would say, I don't know that we need names or anything like that, but do you think anybody is able to reconcile their faith after going through conversion therapy, after going through what they've gone through in evangelicalism? Do you think it's even a viable path for people to be able to remain on?
So yeah, I think maybe there are two parts to the question. Part of it, like, are there people out there who do this? Yeah, there are people out there who have been able to remain faithful to their original faith, or they've changed their faith but still would identify as a Christian. I think that's certainly an experience that I've seen. But the other part for me, the question is why? Like, why would you want to? Right? And for me, like, again, even though my faith has nothing to, or my lack of faith has nothing to do with my sexuality. I really don't, I believe in a God. I really do. Like, I believe there's a God out there. I believe there's something, what do we call it, God or energy or whatever. Of course there's something. I don't know what it is though. And I don't think that thing really cares about me too much. And so I don't really care to get to know it. And I think we're both fine. We're on good terms and that's
Yeah.
that. But I think that for me, like this idea of sort of shoehorning your queer self into Christianity, I don't get it. Like, again, I understand that you want to have a connection with the divine. You want to have some sort of like grappling or sort of relationship with the transcendent. That makes total sense. It's a very like human thing to do. But to go back to like where you were and try to like piece together and cobble together a faith or like a relationship with something that doesn't fit and doesn't accept you for who you are, according again to a very particular understanding of scripture, just doesn't make sense. Again, scripture I think is quite flexible and has a lot of space and room to understand it in different ways, including in a very queer affirming way. And I actually think like a much more intellectually honest way is not anti-queer. I think like it is very much a queer affirming text. However, I just don't get with the rest of Christianity how that really is or why that's something that would be desirable. I don't understand it. But if other folks want to do it, then I'm like, you do you, kill it. Yeah, go for it. Why not?
So here in a minute, I want you to sell us on your book so that we could get as many purchases as possible. But before we do that, I don't know, Matt, if you have any other questions, but also just anything that you like to say or like to talk about, or always kind of wish you were asked that we haven't talked about or haven't dove into.
Oh boy.
I was going to ask, do you have any questions for us? But that just felt really kind of out of left field. So I won't throw that one. I'll just throw that. Is there anything that you like to talk about or say, or that you think is just really important?
You know what? I always make a point to talk about my friends' research because they're friends now. And I'm actually co-writing a book chapter with Christine Robinson, the one who wrote the article about genocidal intentions. And so I always make it a point to bring up their research because I think they're like pioneers in this field and everyone should know who they are. And B, they're also just like so sweet and so good. They're such good humans. And C, because their research is really spot on. But we've already talked about that, so I don't know if I have anything.
Good humans. So I like what you said though about good humans. When you said good humans, I thought, damn, why aren't the Christians the good humans? Like, it just feels so backwards. This whole topic, this whole situation is good humans. Why can't we just be that?
That's what I wonder. And I just think that, again, like I think evangelicalism is upside down moral land where like everything that's good is bad and everything that's bad is good. And like, I used to think, no, it's only like the only part of evangelicalism that doesn't make sense to me is that you can't be gay. Now I'm like, no, like so much of it is just like bonkers. But you know what? I just thought of something that I absolutely would love to talk about. I'm realizing as we say this, or as I say this. So my current project that I'm working on is another edited collection, but this one's about queer experiences at colleges, universities, and seminaries. And so if anyone's out there who wants to submit a chapter for consideration for this collection, I would love to consider it. So that's something that I'm working on right now, and I'll be accepting submissions for the next month or so, maybe a few months after that. But even if you think you're past the deadline when you're listening to this, still send me an email because I would love to be in contact. Because that's something that I'm working on, and I would especially love it if I receive submissions from trans folks and people of color. But I will, of course, read every submission. And so, if anyone's out there and they fit the bill, please send me a message.
So, queer folks who are, say it one more time, just for those folks who didn't get it.
Queer folks who went to Christian colleges, universities, and/or seminaries. And want to write about their experiences. They don't necessarily have to have past writing experience. That, of course, helps, but it's not necessary. And so I'm putting that collection together with the University of Georgia Press. And that'll be coming out, well, once I finish it, I suppose.
All right.
How can people get in touch with you? What's your, what if they wanted to send that to you?
Well, thanks for asking that. My email is lucas.fww@gmail.com. And then social media, I'm Luke Slam Dunk Wilson on Instagram, Luke Slam Dunk Wilson on Threads, Luke Slam Dunk Wilson on Blue Sky. And then to keep it consistent, I'm Wilson_FW on Twitter.
So tell us about shame, sex, attraction. Tell us why we need this book.
Yeah, so Shame Sex Attraction is an edited collection, which is to say an anthology of short stories written by conversion therapy survivors and about their experiences in conversion therapy. And so the 17, I try to go the wrong, oh no, I keep going the wrong way.
There we go.
Now I'm going too far. Here we go.
Sorry.
And so it's a collection of stories, and they're small, they're shorter stories, right? So it's not going to be, it's not going to, it's not a novel by any means. And there are novels out there like Garrett Conley's, Boy Erased, which is phenomenal, which actually Garrett wrote the foreword to the book, which I'm super grateful for. But the stories are mostly within white Christian fundamentalist and evangelical context, but it's also, there's one person who identifies his experience as being in a Chinese cult. There's, secular, there's one story in a secular context, there's a story in an Orthodox Jewish context, and some really fascinating people, people who are actually very important historically, are included, from, Jenna Hickey, who was the first person in Canada to receive a gender neutral passport, to Chaim Levin, who was a part of the class action, or was it a class action? Yeah, it was a class action lawsuit against Jonah, which was a Jewish conversion therapy organization, and they won on the basis of consumer fraud, which was this huge case. And so he's included. And then, Lambda Literary Fellow, who's written in the collection, among other folks. And so former pastors, former, evangelicals, most people, I think at this point, actually, I don't know all of their faith convictions at this point, but a lot of folks who have reconciled themselves outside of the church. But I actually don't know if I know it, and some actually are still within the church. I should say that. But the story span from the U.S. to Canada to Australia, and it's, in my opinion, a fascinating and riveting collection. I remember I was rereading it for last time before I sent it off for proof or to be typeset. And I remember just sitting there thinking, like, dear God, this is a good collection. Like, these are very captivating stories. And so I'm super excited with the folks that contributed, and I'm grateful to all of them, because the collection wouldn't be what it is without them.
All right. Well, thanks for being with us, Lucas. We usually spend about 5 or 10 minutes after the show talking about fitness. You're welcome to hang around and be with us if you want.
Let's chat.
All right. Thanks for being here. Oh, let's go ahead and make sure that you guys are both there. There's Lucas and there's Matt. All right, there we go. Now everybody's back. It's not just me. So we usually spend this time just updating on what's up. You're in your 30s. I think you said Matt is in his early 40s. I'm 47, so I don't know if that's mid. It's getting up there. And what I realized is I spend as much time in physical therapy now as I do actually in the gym, which is crazy. But the older you get, the more you have to work out. And I think did you say you're headed to a workout right after this?
I am. Yeah, it's my new routine. I'm at the gym, I think, like 2 or 3 times a week now, and I'm seeing results, which is exciting for the first time in a very long time. So it's weird to see your body change, past puberty, but it is.
Yeah, if anybody's interested in seeing those, you show off rather often online and have a very nice physique. If I do say so myself. Have you always been into fitness, or is this kind of a new thing?
No, I always say I had a potato body for a long time. It was just kind of there. You know what I mean? Like, there was nothing special about it. And I just, I feel like I was too busy, or at least I told myself I was too busy throughout all of grad school, which for me, grad school is a very long time. And so I always said, once I finish, my PhD, I'm going to go on and I'm going to work out. So then I started working out right after, but not too seriously. And then I really started working out last year. And again, it is crazy, because you're just like, what the hell? Like, my arms, like, you feel your arms, because I used to always sort of feel under my arm and feel like, oh, there's just like sort of like, skin or whatever. And now there's not, like, there's just muscle, and it's a weird and exciting feeling. It's quite fun.
How did you miss the guilt and shame for self-image? As a queer person, every single queer person you talk to is like, they're always in the gym. They're always focused on how they look, because of this, drive, I think that is as much or more so from society and from the community than it is from within. But how did you escape that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, to be honest, like I think that there was a lot of like self um, exploration and sort of like what's the word? Overcoming like shame and guilt and all this, all the really fun consequences of conversion therapy through academia. Academia, I would say, saved my life. Like that was super helpful. But I also think that like body culture for me now. I saw, of course, like within the queer community, all these like major babes who are looking so good, and I'm like, dear God, I don't look like that, and I just want to look like that. And so I started working out, and yeah, I think that is also helpful with like self confidence, and you just feel good about yourself because you're obviously maintaining a healthy lifestyle and eating more or less what you should be eating. I love Coca Cola. It's just my absolute guilty pleasure. But I'm trying my best not to do that anymore. But yeah, I think that this has certainly been an aspect to working through all the bullshit from the past.
Matt, how are you doing?
Yeah, the working out is a good way to clear the mind. Um, yeah, good. I mean, the reset of the new year has been good. My birthday is also the beginning of the year, so I reset after January 6th, which now everybody knows my birthday. It's J6, the J6.
It's a very popular data bug, a certain segment of people.
Yeah, especially last night. So yeah, January 7th, I got back on the wagon, get back in the gym, feeling good, and getting the diet locked and loaded. Um, as Kevin said, my body is breaking down as I get older. So my goal in the gym is just to be able to come back tomorrow, um, so I can continue on. Um, yeah, not much else to say. I don't. I mean, that's kind of a reset of the new year. For you, Lucas, I like to CrossFit. I like to lift heavy weights with that. So I like the mix of cardio and weightlifting, um, and like to beat my body up. So I enjoy that.
Yeah, I'd always kind of worked out off and on most of my life, I guess, but really got serious about 8 years ago or so. Lost about 100 pounds or a little bit more. Um, got into fitness, and I guess during a very toxic church situation, which I don't know that you really need to put the word toxic and church together. I just feel like it's kind of an oxymoron. It's an oxymoron. Toxic church, like it just kind of goes together. But in a very toxic church situation, found the gym, threw myself and my anger and frustration into that. Started seeing results. Over the years, just kept going to the gym. Now I actually have a personal training certification, so now I yell at other people who aren't working out enough. But one of the things you said, Matt, just reminded me. And Lucas, you talking about why do you need church made me think that for me, during a very difficult situation and season in my journey, working out became my sanctuary. It was the place where I felt most connected to the world around me, to myself. It was the place where I prayed, where I cried. All of those, I think, emotional feelings that happen for many people in church happened for me for a long season in the gym. And it became my place of healing. And so, I think that for a lot of people, they end up finding what they didn't find, unfortunately, in church and in spiritual communities and other communities. For some people, that's the fitness community. For some people, that's the gay community, the LGBTQ community. I cross stitch as well. Some people find that in cross stitching. So, yeah. So I think it's fascinating how fitness. I guess just like church and spiritual things should be and can be a very positive thing, but for some people it can be very, very negative, or very counterproductive. The drive or the need, to perform, or the guilt or the shame that comes along with that. There's a lot of transference we find over the years, Matt and I have, between working out and fitness and spiritual communities as well.
Mm-hmm. Both of you used you invoked certain terms that I'm curious about both, and they sound similar, but I don't think they are similar. CrossFit and cross stitch. These are two things that I've heard of, and I don't know much about, and I'm curious about both because I mean, like and both communities love CrossFit and cross stitching, and so I'm curious, like, what do y'all like? What for you? Like, what's the like? This is why I love it.
For me, the CrossFit I got drawn to because of the community aspect, and competitive side. I'm a very competitive person, so you're competing against yourself, you're competing against your class, your friends, ultimately. So I enjoy that aspect of it. I like I said before, I like the variation of training. Like I used to run. I lost a bunch of weight running. I like to say over my life, I've lost 200 pounds and I've gained 205 pounds. So um, my weight's gone up and down. But anyways, I like the variation. I don't like just one thing. So I like that aspect of it. But the community keeps coming back because you become friends and you work out with your friends, and you do life with them, and they're the people I like to hang out with. So that's enjoyable. Um, yeah, and like all the things Kevin said too, it is a because it's a group of people that it's outside my norm. So not only is the workout like stress relieving, I can also get away from whatever is going on here, and even in my own family, and just have a group of people that know me for me, not Pastor Matt or Dad or whatever. And so that's helpful. So I
I
can
have
I can drop the F bomb every now and then, and they don't care.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, I don't know that there's anything fitness related about cross stitching or needlework except for perhaps dexterity. You know, in junior high, I was required to take a home ec class, and half of the home ec class for the semester was cooking, which I thoroughly enjoyed, which is why I had to lose 100 pounds at some point in my life. The other half was, things around the home and sewing. And I found that I just had this extreme love that, in middle school, I had to hide for sewing. And so over the years, I find myself being drawn to a whole lot of creative things like that, but needlework, cross stitching, any of that kind of thing, anything creative is something that I love. Now I don't hide it. I'm just F you, like right, F bomb, fuck you.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Yeah.
If you don't like something that I do, I'm just at the age where I'm like, I just don't care. Which probably comes out a lot in my online interactions. But it's what
Love
makes
it.
me me.
That's great.
Lucas, man, it's been great to have you with us. Thanks for taking all the time here to be with us today. Also, just very thankful for the work that you're doing and the inroads that you're making, the doors that you're opening, the way you're educating people, and shining a light on things that the world really needs to stop looking away from.
Thank you guys so much for having me on the show. I honestly appreciate it.
Thanks.